For centuries, the Red Sea has served as one of the world's most vital arteries of trade, but today it is under siege. What was once a quiet corridor for global commerce has transformed into a high-risk war zone, threatened by a rebel force once dismissed as a regional militia. The Houthi insurgents of Yemen, backed by Iran, have declared war not just on their enemies, but on the global economy. This is the story of a modern maritime crisis, where missiles, drones, and politics collide on the high seas. This is Red Sea Flashpoint, the Houthi threat to global shipping. The Red Sea, shimmering under the relentless sun, has for centuries acted as a vital crossroads for empires, merchants, and now modern shipping giants. Geographically, it is no ordinary body of water. It is a superhighway for the global economy. Stretching more than 2,000 kilometers from the Suez Canal in the north to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the south, this narrow sea is a maritime artery connecting the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. Every year, more than 20 vessels pass through its waters, carrying everything from crude oil and liquefied natural gas to wheat, electronics, and manufactured goods. This maritime route is the lifeblood for nations that rely on trade, including the energy-hungry economies of Europe and Asia. The importance of the Red Sea becomes particularly stark when viewed through the lens of choke points. At its northern end lies the Suez Canal, a man-made passage that handles around 12% of global trade. But perhaps even more significant in terms of vulnerability is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a narrow strip of water only 20 miles wide at its narrowest point. If this passage were to close, ships would be forced to reroute thousands of kilometers around the Cape of Good Hope, adding weeks to transit times and dramatically increasing fuel and insurance costs. In essence, the Bab el-Mandeb is a valve through which global commerce flows, and a perfect pressure point for those seeking to disrupt the world's economic machinery. Historically, the Red Sea has been patrolled and protected by a series of global powers. From the colonial navies of Britain and France to the Cold War-era presence of the Soviet Union and the United States, this corridor has rarely been left unguarded. In recent decades, the U.S. Fifth Fleet and European allies have assumed primary responsibility for ensuring freedom of navigation in this region. For decades, the threats were largely piracy and terrorism, unconventional yet manageable challenges. But beginning in the 2020s, a new, more sophisticated danger began to emerge. Enter the Houthis of Yemen, an insurgent group that has transformed from a regional militia into a key actor in one of the world's most dangerous geopolitical games. By weaponizing this narrow stretch of sea, they are not just striking at military enemies or symbolic targets. They are disrupting the very infrastructure of global trade. The Red Sea has gone from a passage of peace to a theater of war, with drones, missiles, and naval mines turning the waters into a calculated battleground. As ships move through the region today, they do so not with confidence, but with fear. Watchstanders scan the skies and radar screens for small, fast-moving drones. Captains receive real-time intelligence alerts about potential threats, and crew members drill for missile strikes and hijacking scenarios. The modern cargo ship, once a symbol of peaceful globalization, now resembles a soft target in a contested zone. This evolving threat landscape is already having ripple effects worldwide. Insurance premiums for Red Sea transits have surged, some shipping companies have abandoned the route altogether, and global supply chains, already stressed from pandemic-era disruptions, face fresh uncertainty. Consumers, policymakers, and military planners alike are beginning to understand just how fragile the architecture of global commerce really is. The Red Sea is more than a stretch of saltwater. It is a stage upon which the forces of ideology, geopolitics, and economic survival now converge. And with no end in sight to the tensions rippling across this region, the world must confront a sobering reality. the maritime world is no longer immune to conflict. It has become one of its primary arenas. In the heart of this once routine shipping lane, a modern war is being waged not only between nations, but against the very foundation of the global economy. And the players, both state and non-state, are increasingly willing to escalate. In the rugged mountains of northern Yemen, a movement began in the shadows, one that would grow over 2 decades to become a central player in the Middle East's most complicated conflict. The Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, trace their origins to the early 2000s as a religious and political movement among Yemen's Zaydi Shia minority. Initially, their grievances were local opposing government corruption, economic neglect, and the marginalization of the North. But their ambitions, over time, expanded dramatically. By fusing ideological zeal with savvy political maneuvering, the Houthis transformed themselves from a tribal resistance into a paramilitary force capable of seizing and holding territory. The turning point came in 2014. Exploiting the chaos of the Arab Spring and a fragile central government, the Houthis stormed the capital, Sana'a, toppling Yemen's internationally recognized government. In 2015, their momentum triggered a massive regional backlash. Saudi Arabia, fearing an Iranian foothold on its southern border, launched a military coalition to restore the Yemeni government and push the Houthis back. What followed was one of the most brutal conflicts in recent memory, a war that has killed hundreds of thousands and pushed Yemen to the brink of famine. Iran, seeing an opportunity to expand its regional influence, stepped in quietly but decisively. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, particularly its Quds Force, began supplying the Houthis with weapons, advisors, and technical support. Over time, the Houthis gained access to ballistic missile systems, drones, and advanced surveillance equipment. They began targeting not just Yemeni government forces, but also Saudi oil infrastructure, airports, and even cities like Riyadh. Their arsenal, once limited to rifles and mortars, now includes guided missiles and UAV capable of striking deep into enemy territory. What makes the Houthis unique among Iran's proxies is their level of self-reliance and adaptability. Unlike Hezbollah in Lebanon or Shia militias in Iraq, the Houthis have become a near-sovereign force, governing vast swaths of Yemen, collecting taxes, managing ports, and operating military industries. They have fused nationalism with religion, portraying themselves as defenders of Yemen against foreign invaders. Their messaging is laced with anti-American and anti-Israeli rhetoric, but also appeals to popular grievances, poverty, injustice, and resistance against what they call imperial aggression. This ideological blend, along with their strategic location near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, has elevated the Houthis from a domestic insurgency to a regional power broker. In recent years, they have demonstrated a growing ability to strike maritime targets, laying naval mines, launching anti-ship missiles, and deploying explosive-laden boats. Their tactics mimic those of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, a decentralized, fast, moving, and difficult to predict force that thrives in narrow waters like the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. But the Houthis are not just proxies, they are also political actors. Their leadership operates with a clear sense of long-term vision. They have negotiated ceasefires, participated in UN talks, and sought international legitimacy even as they continue to wage war. Their communications often claim the moral high ground, portraying their actions as defensive responses to Israeli or Western aggression. Yet, in practice, their military campaigns have destabilized one of the world's poorest countries and now threaten the arteries of global trade. Understanding the Houthis means understanding their dual nature. On one hand, they are an insurgency born from marginalization. On the other, they are a military force shaped by Iranian mentorship and strategic ambition. Their growing reach beyond Yemen's borders into Saudi territory, into Gulf shipping lanes, and into international politics marks a dramatic evolution. They are not a rogue militia acting in isolation. They are now a key node in a web of regional conflict stretching from Tehran to Gaza to the Horn of Africa. In the 2020s, as warfare moves increasingly into gray zones, neither fully conventional nor fully irregular, the Houthis offer a case study in how non-state actors can achieve strategic disruption on a global scale. They are redefining what it means to be a rebel force in the 21st century, not with overwhelming numbers, but with technological ingenuity, regional alliances, and a deep understanding of psychological dimensions of modern war. In the waning months of 2023, the world watched in disbelief as merchant vessels in the Red Sea came under a series of coordinated, high-stakes attacks. Missiles streaked across the sky, drones exploded into hulls, and alarms blared across international shipping networks. The source of this chaos, the Houthis, who declared open season on ships they claimed were linked to Israel, the United States, and their allies. But in reality, their targets often included civilian cargo vessels with no direct ties to any nation involved in the Gaza conflict. The goal was clear, not simply retaliation, but disruption. The Houthis declared these attacks as a form of solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza, saying they would continue until Israeli operations ceased. Yet the implications were far broader. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, through which millions of barrels of oil and trillions of dollars in goods pass annually, had suddenly become one of the most dangerous passages in the world. Major commercial shipping companies like Maersk, MSC, and CMA began diverting ships around Africa's Cape of Good Hope, a route that adds over 0 kilometers and weeks of transit time. Insurance firms reacted quickly. War risk premiums skyrocketed. Some ports refused to handle ships that had passed through the Red Sea. Global oil prices began to inch upward again, echoing fears from the energy crises of the past. Meanwhile, satellite images showed burning vessels, while crews issued distress calls and maritime security teams scrambled to deploy evasive maneuvers. What made the attacks particularly effective was their unpredictability. The Houthis launched drones from inland Yemen, often guided with precision targeting systems suspected to be of Iranian origin. Some were programmed to loiter over sea lanes for hours before striking. They used modified naval mines and remote, controlled boats packed with explosives, techniques reminiscent of attacks on Saudi tankers in previous years. But the scale was new, and so was the messaging. These attacks were not just tactical, they were strategic and symbolic. The psychological effect on global shipping was immense. Captains began refusing routes. Crews faced not only physical danger, but mental strain. Governments issued warnings, rerouted naval escorts, and began diplomatic coordination to handle the crisis. The message was unmistakable. No ship was entirely safe. Beyond the visible destruction, the Houthis were engaging in a kind of hybrid maritime warfare that blurred lines between terrorism, military conflict, and political messaging. Their targets weren't just ships, they were confidence, stability, and global order. They understood that a single successful strike could rattle stock markets and make headlines around the world. In this way, the Houthis were not just disrupting trade, they were manipulating perception. Perhaps most alarmingly, the crisis revealed a serious vulnerability in the global trade architecture. While navies and maritime insurers had long considered state naval conflict unlikely, few anticipated that a stateless militia could disrupt one of the world's most vital shipping corridors. For months on end, with relatively low-cost technology, some of it homemade, some smuggled, they were achieving strategic impact at a fraction of the cost that any state military would require. By early 2024, the effects were being felt in factories, ports, and fuel stations around the globe. Freight costs were up, inventory shortages grew, questions swirled among policymakers. If this can happen in the Red Sea, where else could it happen? Could the Strait of Hormuz be next, or the Malacca Strait? The Houthis, operating from one of the most impoverished countries in the world, had successfully reminded the world that the global economy runs on fragile assumptions of security, assumptions they were now challenging head-on. As the attacks in the Red Sea escalated and commercial shipping faced increasing peril, the international community could no longer remain passive. The United States, already a dominant naval power in the region, took the lead. In December 2023, Washington announced the launch of Operation Prosperity Guardian, a multinational effort to ensure maritime security in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and Arabian Sea. Backed by the United Kingdom and a growing list of allies including Bahrain, the Netherlands, and even non-NATO partners, the mission aimed to deter Houthi aggression, protect commercial vessels, and reassert freedom of navigation through one of the world's most vital corridors. American warships, including destroyers equipped with Aegis missile defense systems, surged into the area. Aircraft carriers began patrols along key choke points. Surveillance drones and maritime reconnaissance aircraft kept constant watch over Houthi launch zones in western Yemen. When necessary, F/A-18s and other strike aircraft launched precision attacks on radar installations, missile storage depots, and drone assembly sites deep within Houthi-controlled territory. These operations, while surgical, sent a clear message. Attacks on international shipping would be met with overwhelming force. The British Royal Navy also played a visible role, with HMS Diamond and other warships conducting escort missions for vulnerable cargo vessels. The UK Parliament stood firmly behind the operation, recognizing the strategic importance of keeping global trade flowing and deterring Iranian influence in the region. France and Italy contributed intelligence, assets, and logistical support. Even regional navies, once hesitant to take sides in Yemen's civil war, began participating in coordination drills and patrols. Despite the show of force, the mission faced a delicate balancing act. For every missile intercepted or drone destroyed, there remained the political risk of escalation. Iran, while officially denying any direct control over the Houthis, issued warnings. Its proxy network, extending from Lebanon to Iraq, could be activated if the conflict widened. Israeli officials watched nervously, fearing the Red Sea could become another front in their multi-theater struggle against Iran and its allies. In Washington and London, officials emphasized that the military campaign was not aimed at defeating the Houthis entirely, an unachievable task without full-scale ground war, but rather at containing the threat and preserving maritime stability. The strategy relied on deterrence, rapid response, and coalition unity. Naval command centers across Bahrain, Djibouti, and Diego Garcia hummed with activity as analysts and officers worked around the clock to anticipate the next wave of Houthi attacks. Yet, even with sophisticated missile defense systems, the danger could not be fully eliminated. A single drone slipping through defenses could cause millions in damage, or worse, result in civilian casualties. On several occasions, merchant vessels suffered damage from shrapnel or near misses. One ship, struck directly by a kamikaze drone near Hodeida, had to be abandoned by its crew and later towed to port, further intensifying calls for stronger military retaliation. The conflict also redefined how the world understood maritime warfare. No longer was it confined to large fleets clashing in open waters. Now the enemy could be a modified fishing boat carrying explosives, or a drone launched from a mobile platform deep in the desert. This asymmetrical threat demanded new thinking integrating cyber, intelligence, rapid satellite reconnaissance, and AI-driven threat prediction to keep pace with an elusive adversary. Operation Prosperity Guardian was not without controversy. Human rights groups raised concerns about collateral damage from airstrikes inside Yemen. Some regional powers questioned whether the West was using the Red Sea threat to justify a broader anti-Iran agenda. Still, most nations recognized that the global economy simply could not function if the arteries of trade were allowed to bleed. As the operation entered its second and third phases, the coalition remained committed but cautious. The Houthis, though bloodied, were not broken. In many ways, they had already succeeded in demonstrating their strategic reach and political relevance. The question was no longer whether the Red Sea would be militarized. It already was. The real question was whether the world could prevent this conflict from spiraling into a wider regional war. As the Red Sea became increasingly volatile, the effects of the conflict rippled far beyond the Middle East. Within weeks of the first drone attacks on commercial vessels, global supply chains began to feel the impact. Ships rerouted thousands of kilometers around the southern tip of Africa. Fuel consumption skyrocketed. Insurance premiums soared. What had once been a smooth, calculated logistical operation turned into a high-risk gamble for shipping companies worldwide. Oil was the first market to react. The possibility of disrupted flows through the Suez Canal and Bab el-Mandeb Strait caused oil futures to spike. Prices breached the symbolic $100 per barrel threshold, sending energy markets into a flurry of speculation. For nations heavily reliant on imported energy, such as India, Japan, and most of Europe, this wasn't just a trade issue. It was a strategic vulnerability. The container shipping industry, already recovering from the aftershocks of COVID-19 and the 2021 Ever-Given blockage in the Suez Canal, now faced another nightmare. Delays became the norm. Congestion at alternative ports in South Africa, India, and even Brazil rose dramatically. Storage facilities overflowed. Customs agencies were overwhelmed. Every extra day at sea meant increased costs, longer delivery timelines, and fewer vessels available to meet global demand. For consumers, the effects trickled down quickly. Supermarkets in Europe reported delays in the arrival of fresh produce and frozen goods. Auto manufacturers once again paused production due to missing parts. Electronics companies struggled to keep up with demand as vital components were stuck in transit. Inflation, which had just begun to stabilize after years of volatility, started to tick upward once again. This crisis laid bare the extent to which global prosperity hinges on a fragile, finely tuned logistical machine. The vast network of ships, ports, customs, and containers had no defense against a small group of militants with relatively low-tech weapons. The world had invested trillions in free trade, but far less in securing the routes that made it possible. For insurance companies, the Red Sea became a red line. War risk surcharges on ships traveling through the danger zone climbed as high as $5 million per voyage, up from just $500 months earlier. Many companies flatly refused to insure vessels transiting Yemeni waters, effectively forcing ships to take the long way around. That rerouting added 2 to 3 weeks per journey and millions in additional fuel and labor costs. In boardrooms and government ministries, planners began drawing up worst-case scenarios. What if the Houthis expanded their threat to the Arabian Sea? What if a broader confrontation with Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz? What if terrorist groups inspired by Houthis began targeting other maritime choke points like the Panama Canal or the Strait of Malacca? Investors began to reassess risk. Countries with domestic manufacturing capabilities saw renewed interest. The push to diversify supply chains, already underway due to the pandemic, accelerated, but such shifts require time, and the global system, as it stands, remains highly vulnerable. The Red Sea crisis also forced policymakers to grapple with difficult questions. Was it ethical to strike civilian areas in Houthi-controlled Yemen if doing so might deter future attacks? Should Western powers deploy ground forces to secure ports? Would deeper involvement risk a direct war with Iran? All of this unfolded against a backdrop of rising geopolitical tension. China, with massive economic interests tied to maritime routes, began making overtures about alternative security frameworks. Russia blamed Western interventionism for the crisis. Meanwhile, developing countries bore the brunt of disrupted grain shipments and rising food prices. What began as a localized conflict between a rebel group and regional powers had become something much larger, a global economic emergency exposing the brittle foundation of interconnected trade. For decades, the assumption had been that the seas would remain open. Now, that assumption is being challenged not just by great powers, but by small groups with big ambitions and the technology to back them up. As months pass and the crisis in the Red Sea persists, one thing has become tragically clear: there is no easy exit. Despite the international coalition's best efforts, the Houthis remain defiant. Their leadership issues statements of resistance from bunkers in Sana'a, proclaiming victory for every disrupted shipment, every vessel forced to divert, and every headline capturing their defiance. They do not operate by the rules of conventional warfare, and that, perhaps, is what makes them so effective in this new era of conflict. What we are witnessing is the evolution of modern warfare, not in the trenches, but on trade routes, not through divisions of tanks, but through drones, propaganda, and calculated disruption. The Houthis are fighting a strategic war of perception and attrition. Their goal is not to sink the global economy outright, but to rattle it, to show the world that no route, no ship, no corporation is untouchable. Military pressure can degrade their capabilities, but it cannot erase their ideology or their grievances. Political solutions seem distant. Yemen remains a divided nation with no functioning unity government. The humanitarian catastrophe continues to deepen, further fueling resentment. Regional powers are entangled in overlapping conflicts. Meanwhile, Iran's shadow looms large, using the Houthi threat as leverage against Western pressure elsewhere on nuclear issues, on sanctions, and in Syria and Iraq. Diplomacy offers no clear breakthroughs. UN peace talks stall. Ceasefires are temporary and fragile. Meanwhile, each intercepted missile, each retaliatory airstrike, and each downed drone becomes part of a bloody chess game. It's a game played not just between the Houthis and their adversaries, but between rival world orders, between global trade and localized resistance, between Western dominance and emerging multipolarity. As ships continue to pass through dangerous waters, captains do so with tension in their shoulders and eyes on the radar. The global economy, built on the premise of smooth, uninterrupted trade, has no insurance policy against asymmetric warfare. The Red Sea is no longer a corridor of commerce. It is a symbol of a world where threats are diffuse, actors are unpredictable, and even the smallest spark can ignite global consequences. In this landscape, the Houthis are not just a rebel group. They are a symptom of a deeper malaise, a global system under strain, where local conflicts have global reach, and where non-state actors can wield state-level influence. Unless deeper structural changes are made both in Yemen and in the assumptions underpinning global trade, the Red Sea Flashpoint will not be the last. It may be a harbinger of what's to come. The Red Sea, once a symbol of unity between continents, now stands at the intersection of ideology, conflict, and commerce. As tankers zigzag past missile alerts and warships play cat and mouse with drones, one thing is clear: the new era of warfare is not just on the battlefield. It's in our sea lanes, our cargo holds, and the delicate threads that hold global trade together. In this high-stakes standoff, it's not just the Houthis who are rewriting the rules, but a world struggling to adapt to a new, more dangerous normal.